Archaeologists just found something in Turkey that shouldn't exist. Not according to everything we thought we knew about early human civilization. At a site called Sayburç, buried under thousands of years of dirt and time, there's a carving. A three-dimensional human figure, life-sized, staring out from a stone bench. It's 11,000 years old. That's older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than the wheel. And it's raising questions that archaeology can't easily answer. So what makes Sayburç different from its famous neighbor Göbekli Tepe? And why are scientists calling this discovery a game-changer? Let's dig in. First, let's establish what we're dealing with here. Sayburç is an archaeological site in southeastern Turkey, about 35 miles east of another site you've probably heard of, Göbekli Tepe. If you haven't heard of Göbekli Tepe, here's the short version. It's a massive stone temple complex, built around 9,600 BCE, which makes it roughly 11,600 years old. When it was discovered in the 1990s, it completely upended our understanding of early human society. Then settlements, then religion, then monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe said nope, wrong order. These people built massive ritual sites before they even figured out how to grow wheat. Sayburç is from roughly the same period, give or take a few centuries. Both sites date to what archaeologists call the pre-pottery Neolithic period. That's the time after the Ice Age ended, but before people figured out how to make clay pots. This is right at the moment when everything changed, when humans went from nomadic to sedentary, from temporary camps to permanent villages. But here's where Sayburç diverges from Göbekli Tepe in a fundamental way. Göbekli Tepe is full of symbolism. Abstract carvings of animals, geometric patterns, T-shaped pillars that might represent gods or ancestors or who knows what. It's clearly ritual, clearly important, but it's also clearly not trying to depict reality. It's symbolic, conceptual, the kind of art that requires interpretation. Sayburç. Sayburç shows people, real, recognizable human figures carved in 3 dimensions. And that changes everything. Let me explain why this matters. For most of human prehistory, people didn't carve themselves. Handprints, abstract symbols, but not detailed human figures. When humans did appear in prehistoric art, they were usually stick figures or simplified shapes. The focus was always on animals. Bison, horses, mammoths, whatever they were hunting. The few human figures that do appear are either highly stylized or, let's be honest, kind of crude. Then suddenly at Sayburç, you've got life-sized human figures carved with anatomical detail. We're talking about people who took the time to show facial features, body proportions, posture. This isn't abstract. This is representational art at a level that shouldn't exist for another several thousand years according to the traditional timeline. The main carving at Sayburç, the one that's getting all the attention, it's hard to tell because the lower part is damaged, but the upper body is clear. The leopards are on either side, facing the human. It's a scene. It's telling a story. And that's the part that makes archaeologists nervous. Because storytelling through art at this level of sophistication puts these people way ahead of where we thought they should be. The carving is part of a stone bench, which is itself part of a larger structure. The bench is about 3 feet high and runs along the interior wall of what was probably a communal building. Multiple people could sit on this bench and they'd be sitting right next to this carved figure. That's intentional. Whoever made this wanted people to interact with it, to be close to it, maybe even to sit with it as if it were another person in the room. Now, contrast this with Göbekli Tepe. At Göbekli Tepe, you've got these massive T-shaped pillars, some of them 20 feet tall and weighing 20 tons. They're arranged in circles, like a giant stone Stonehenge, but older and weirder. The pillars have carvings on them, mostly animals, scorpions, vultures, all kinds of creatures. Some of the pillars have what might be arms carved on them, suggesting they might represent humanoid figures, but they're not realistic. They're abstract, symbolic. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were clearly trying to create something impressive, something monumental. It took hundreds of people working together to quarry those stones, transport them, and erect them. This was a massive communal effort, probably the largest construction project in human history up to that point. But it was all in service of creating a ritual space, a temple, a place apart from daily life. Sayburç is different. It's smaller, more intimate. The buildings there aren't temples, they're probably residential or communal structures. People live there, or at least spent significant time there. The carvings aren't meant to intimidate or inspire awe from a distance. They're meant to be lived with, to be part of daily experience. That's a fundamentally different approach to art and symbolism. And here's where it gets really interesting. The leopards flanking the human figure at Sayburç, they're not attacking. They're not in a hunting scene. They're just there on either side, almost like guardians or companions. In later cultures, thousands of years later, you see this motif all the time. Gods or kings flanked by animals, showing their power over nature or their connection to the divine. The Mesopotamians did it, the Egyptians did it, the Hittites did it. It's a classic power motif. But this carving is from 11,000 years ago. Mesopotamia won't exist for another 6,000 years. Egypt is even further out. The idea that these people at Sayburç already had this symbolic vocabulary, this visual language of power and authority, it suggests a level of social complexity that we didn't think existed yet. Let's talk about what that complexity might look like. In order to create art like this, you need several things. First, you need specialists. Someone who's really good at carving stone doesn't have time to hunt or gather food all day. That means the community has to produce enough food surplus to support people who don't directly contribute to food production. That's a big deal in a society that's just barely figuring out how to grow crops. Second, you need a reason to create this art. Art at this scale isn't just decoration. It serves a purpose. Maybe it's religious, commemorating a shaman or a leader. Maybe it's historical, recording an important event or person, teaching people about their relationship with dangerous animals like leopards. Whatever the purpose, it indicates that these people had complex ideas they needed to express in permanent form. Third, you need continuity. Creating something like this takes time. Weeks, probably months. The artist or artists working on it need to know they're going to be in the same place long enough to finish. That means the community is stable, settled, not planning to pack up and move in 2 weeks when the berries run out somewhere else. All of this points to Sayburç being part of the early Neolithic revolution, that moment when humans transitioned from mobile hunter-gatherers to settled agriculturalists. But the traditional understanding of that transition is that it happened gradually. People started cultivating a few plants, then more, then they started building permanent houses, then villages, then they developed complex social structures in art and religion. Sayburç and Göbekli Tepe flip that narrative. They suggest that religion and art and complex social structures came first, or at least came alongside agriculture, not after it, not the other way around. But why? That's the question that keeps archaeologists up at night. Why would people invest so much effort into creating these sites? What was the payoff? One theory is that these sites were regional gathering places. The people living around Sayburç and Göbekli Tepe weren't necessarily living there year-round. They might have been semi-nomadic, moving around the landscape but coming together at these special sites for festivals, rituals, trade, or just socializing. Think of it like a yearly fair or religious pilgrimage. But 11,000 years ago, if that's the case, then the art at these sites served to create shared identity. When people from different groups came together, they needed something to unify them, to remind them they were part of the same cultural tradition. The carvings, the architecture, the rituals conducted at these sites, all of that created a sense of belonging to something larger than your immediate family or band. Another theory is that these sites were actually residential, that people did live there permanently or at least seasonally. The buildings at Sayburç look residential. They've got benches for sitting, hearths for cooking, storage areas. This wasn't just a temple where people showed up once a year. This was a place where life happened. If that's true, then the carved figures at Sayburç might represent something even more interesting. Maybe their ancestors. Many cultures venerate their ancestors, creating images of important deceased individuals and incorporating them into daily life. You see this in later Neolithic cultures in Turkey and the Levant, where people buried their dead under the floors of their houses and kept plastered skulls of ancestors on display. The figure at Sayburç could be exactly that, an ancestor or important person being commemorated and incorporated into the communal space. The leopards might represent their power, their connection to the dangerous wild world outside the settlement, their role as protector or leader. Or maybe it's not an individual at all. Maybe it's a representation of a deity or spirit. Early humans had complex spiritual beliefs. We know that from much older sites. Cave paintings from 30,000 years ago show humans interacting with animals in ways that suggest ritual or spiritual significance. By 11,000 years ago, those beliefs could have evolved into something much more structured, with specific deities or spirits represented in art. The problem is, we don't know. We can't ask the people who made these carvings what they meant. We can only look at the evidence and make educated guesses. And the evidence at Sayburç is frustratingly incomplete. But there's still a lot of work to do. Most of the structures are still buried. We're looking at maybe 10% of the total site, if that. What we do know is that Sayburç was occupied for a significant period of time. Archaeological evidence suggests people were using the site for hundreds of years, maybe longer. That's plenty of time for cultural traditions to develop and evolve. The carved figures might have meant one thing when they were first created and something different to people living there 200 years later. We also know that Sayburç wasn't unique. There are other sites in the region with similar features. Göbekli Tepe is the most famous. But there's also Karahan Tepe, Harbet Suvan Tepesi, Sefer Tepe, and probably dozens more that haven't been found yet. This whole region of southeastern Turkey was a hotbed of early Neolithic innovation. Something special was happening here 11,000 years ago, something that would eventually spread across the Middle East and into Europe and beyond. The question is, what? What was so special about this time and place that led to this explosion of monumental architecture and sophisticated art? The Ice Age was ending. The environment was becoming more hospitable. Wild grains were abundant in the region, making it easier to support larger populations. But other places had similar conditions and didn't develop these kinds of sites. There had to be something else, some social or cultural factor that pushed these particular people to start building and creating on this scale. One possibility is that this was a period of intense competition and cooperation. Different groups were coming into more frequent contact with each other as populations grew and territories overlapped. Building impressive monuments and creating sophisticated art could be a way of asserting dominance, of showing neighboring groups that your people were powerful and organized. At the same time, these sites could facilitate cooperation, bringing different groups together for trade and intermarriage and the sharing of ideas. Another possibility is that this was driven by individual ambition. Maybe there were charismatic leaders, what anthropologists call big men, who used monumental construction as a way to gain prestige and followers. In many traditional societies, leaders don't inherit their position. They earn it by organizing feasts, building monuments, demonstrating generosity and capability. The person who could organize the construction of a site like Sayburç or Göbekli Tepe would gain enormous social capital. But here's what makes Sayburç specifically different from Göbekli Tepe, and why archaeologists are so excited about it. Göbekli Tepe is impressive, but it's also weird. It doesn't fit neatly into the story of human development because it was eventually deliberately buried and abandoned. The people who built it covered it up with dirt, filled in the structures, and walked away. We don't know why. It's like they built this incredible site, used it for a few hundred years, and then decided it was time to close that chapter. Sayburç doesn't seem to have been deliberately buried. It was occupied and then gradually abandoned as people moved on or populations shifted. The structures fell into disrepair naturally, slowly getting covered by wind-blown dust and the accumulation of centuries. That suggests Sayburç was part of normal life in a way Göbekli Tepe wasn't. And that brings us to the human figures. Humans are barely present in the art. It's all about animals and abstract symbols. At Sayburç, humans are literally front and center. That shift in focus tells us something important about how these people saw themselves and their place in the world. At Göbekli Tepe, the message seems to be about humans in relationship to the wild, to nature, to forces beyond their control. Sometimes threatening. There's a sense of awe and maybe fear. Humans are small, insignificant, dwarfed by these massive pillars and the creatures carved on them. At Sayburç, the message is different. The human figure is prominent. The human seems to be in control, or at least in harmony with these dangerous animals. That suggests a shift in mindset, a growing confidence in humanity's ability to shape and control the environment. This makes sense chronologically. Sayburç is slightly later than Göbekli Tepe, or at least from a phase of the Neolithic when agriculture was becoming more established. People were learning to control their food supply through cultivation and animal domestication. It makes sense that their art would reflect this growing sense of mastery over the natural world. But it also raises uncomfortable questions about what was lost in that transition. Göbekli Tepe was abandoned and buried. Why? Did the beliefs and practices associated with it become obsolete as agriculture took over? Did new ideas replace the old ones? Was there conflict between groups with different ideologies? We know that the transition to agriculture wasn't all positive. Hunter-gatherers generally had more varied diets, better health, and more leisure time than early farmers. Farming allowed for larger populations and food surpluses, but it also meant harder work, more disease, and eventually social inequality as some people accumulated more resources than others. The art at these sites might reflect that tension, with its focus on wild animals and nature, might represent the worldview of people still closely connected to hunting and gathering. Sayburç, with its human figures and implied control over dangerous animals, might represent the emerging agricultural worldview, where humans are separate from and superior to nature. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe the difference is just stylistic, or represents different cultural traditions, or was made by different groups with different beliefs. The truth is, we're still figuring this out. Every new excavation brings new evidence and new questions. What we can say for certain is that the carved figures at Sayburç represent a major development in human art and expression. That's a big deal. It shows cognitive and artistic capabilities that we didn't think existed in people at that time and place. It also shows that the early Neolithic period was way more complex and varied than we used to think. It wasn't a simple linear progression from hunting to farming to civilization. It was a messy, creative, experimental time when different groups were trying different approaches to life, some of which worked and some of which didn't. Sayburç and Göbekli Tepe are both part of that experimentation. They're both examples of humans pushing the boundaries of what was possible, creating things that required organization, cooperation, skill, and vision. The fact that they took different approaches, focused on different subjects, and had different fates tells us that there wasn't one path from prehistory to civilization. There were many paths, and we're only just starting to understand them. The excavations at Sayburç are ongoing. There's still so much buried under the ground, so many more carvings and structures waiting to be found. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, another clue about who these people were and what they believed and how they saw the world. And that's ultimately what makes archaeology so compelling. We're not just digging up old stuff. We're uncovering the story of our species, the long, complicated journey from small bands of hunter-gatherers to the complex global civilization we have today. Sites like Sayburç show us that our ancestors were every bit as creative, intelligent, and capable as we are. They just had different challenges and different tools. The carved figures at Sayburç have been staring out from that stone bench for 11,000 years, waiting for someone to find them and wonder about the hands that made them and the people who sat beside them. Now we've found them, and the questions they raise will keep archaeologists busy for decades to come. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos about recent archaeological discoveries and what they tell us about human history, hit that subscribe button. New videos coming soon.